Last year for Halloween, I made this elaborate Gibson Girl inspired Beetlejuice costume, and it involved sewing hundreds and hundreds of black and white stripes onto a base fabric to then turn into the suit. And I have nowhere to wear that costume. It took so long to make, but there aren't any conventions happening, and I have a lot of leftover stripes from making it, so I decided to turn the rest of those stripes, or like a portion of the rest of those stripes if we're being real, into a rectangle skirt, which is something I wear all the time. So, here you go. Enjoy.
So to start out with, I'm marking all of my panels before they're sewn into a skirt in 2-inch wide channels horizontally. So I took each panel individually before I sewed them all together because I just didn't want to have to navigate the entire length of the full skirt. When I make a rectangle skirt, I use 3 full widths of the fabric as the volume, which is a lot to wrangle on a table the size I have, or most any table, frankly. So I just took my Omnigrid ruler and marked 2 inches apart down the entire skirt. You guys get to see one panel. It took a while, but it's really so much easier to have these channels to just sort of sew along the lines than it is to sort of try and line up the edges of the strips, because they're not even. Some of them are stretched, some of them are woven, so they don't create a perfect line. So now I'm sewing together the panels to create one long piece of fabric for the skirt to be made out of, and then also the stripes on after I have them all in one super long piece of fabric. The markings lined up pretty well. The Omnigrid rulers they're accurate. That's why they're used in quilting. Here we have white stripes going onto the fabric. These fabrics are literally just scraps of what I had lying around, and a few of them were bought at places like the Restore, which is like a thrift shop for craft supplies we have in Northern California, and a few Etsy sellers that sell scrap lots from their businesses, but for the most part it was just stuff I had lying around that was black or white. Some of them are short, so they're layered up a lot. Some of them are longer strips, like this first stripe looks like it is, that were just cut out of a full length of the fabric. This is a little stretch lace that I got at the Goodwill outlet. Fun tip, if you are ever at the Goodwill outlet, there's a lot of yardage just sitting in those bins, and if you're willing to wash it, then it's perfectly viable fabric. Some more lace. I made a Mary Poppins skirt out of that years ago. And some satin that I made a Gatsby dress out of when that DiCaprio movie came out. And these stripes do take forever. This footage is sped up like many factors. And it's still only 2 stripes. I think the skirt has 12 stripes on it total. Here we go in with the black stripes. I finished up all the white ones and then just fill in the blanks with the black stripes. I wasn't paying the closest of attention when grabbing stripes, so I've had to deal with layering some of them already to get the full width of 2 inches down on the fabric, which I think is kind of cool. Obviously this look, the stripes are all unhemmed, they're gonna fray a bit. The look is not aiming for perfection. It's sort of a scrappier, more organic vibe that I'm going for with this sort of feel. And boy, does this first black strap get that point across. It has got a lot of weird layers in there. Off camera later, I think I even went in and did some decorative stitching over the edge of this gray stripe here. It's all about fun texture with these stripes. At the very end, after sewing all of the black and white stripes on, I went through and added some little bits of lace and trims into their respective stripes just to add even more texture and interest. Because I don't know, why not? It's a scrap stripe skirt. It might as well be everything it can be, right? Here's some fun sequin fabric that I had lying around. I think that one was purchased for the Beetlejuice costume. So don't worry, I didn't have massive yardage of sequins and cut it all down into 2-inch strips. That would be absurd. Alright, so I'm going to pin it to the waistband now. I mark my waistband out on thirds because I have 3 panels, and then I pin each pin to one of the seam joins. And it just gives me a little bit more of a guide to get the gathers evenly spaced throughout the skirt. I have gone through already on this and sewn a gathering stitch through, which is just a really long machine stitch. Once again, I break them up by thirds, so I don't have one continuous gathering stitch across the whole top. I have one for each third. And then I just take my time and gently gather each section up to match the waistband's width, and then pin it on. So here's the whole waistband, pins to the whole skirt. The pins are pretty close together because I just want to hold those gathers nice and securely. Fun fact, this is the first time I realized that I have a tendency to press the reverse button on my machine with my middle finger. So, sorry, I'm working on it in future videos. I'm not trying to flip you off every time I reverse on the machine. When I'm sewing the waistband to the skirt, I tend to stop at every pin, which is a lot of stopping, but it gives me an opportunity to sort of adjust the gathers so they're lying straight. If I sew without doing this, the gathers tend to pull diagonally, so instead of lying straight up and down, they're sewn in at a diagonal, and it just has less of a nice effect in the final skirt. Now I've got the waistband all stitched on to the gathers. I pre-iron and sew the ends of my waistbands before I sew them to the gathers, so that when I'm done with that, it's just a matter of pinning so that I can stitch in the ditch and get it all sealed up. A stitch in the ditch is just when you're stitching over a seam line, basically, trying to hide the stitches in that crease between the two fabrics. Which for this skirt I'm less careful with because once again the whole thing's just a mess of texture, so having a little bit of thread up or down on the waistband or gathers isn't gonna bother me, and this skirt is for me, so I don't have to worry about what would bother other people. I also tend to wear my skirts with a belt, so it's really not even going to be noticeable. Button time! Here's my black button jar. I have a bad habit of buying all of the button lots I see at thrift stores. So I have a lot of buttons. Most of them are sorted out by color, which makes it easier to do things like this, picking a button for a skirt. Just going through and finding ones that I think might look cool. Got a plaid one here. A lot of these are vintage buttons because I got them at thrift stores. I don't know exactly how old, but there are rarely buttons that I have bought new in these bins, and because I bought them at thrift stores, I don't really know what's in my button collection oftentimes, so there's always a nice surprise in there somewhere. Alright, down to the 4 final buttons. Gonna compare them to the waistband. I did pick the button out earlier in the process, but for some reason I added it in here. The final 2 contestants. And the winning button. It's a cool button. Alright, I have my machine doing a buttonhole. I think that the machine buttonhole looks and works fine on this. It's not a hassle, and it doesn't turn out a crap buttonhole, so I don't bother doing it twice or hand doing all my buttonholes. I think this is great. Ta-da! Alright, so for the hem, I went with an iron and ironed up about a 1/4 inch along the entire bottom of the skirt, and then I just folded it up to match that first blue stripe line that I have on there. Stitched close to the edge, and that is good enough for me. Then after a quick iron, the whole thing is done. That's a done skirt. This project took about 2 days because of all of those stripes. You're essentially making a new fabric when you're doing something like this. But I love it. I think it just turned out great. Check out the photos. Thanks for watching. I'm doing a video every day of October, so if you want to see what those are, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.